Okay, in this video, we will be going to discuss about these important biomolecules, that is the carbohydrates. All right. So before we start with the introduction, I just want to let you know that there will be a series of videos on this particular topic, that is on the carbohydrates, on structure as well as classification of carbohydrates. So this is the first part, the first video, where we are going to discuss only about the I will give only the introduction. Okay, what are carbohydrates, and also I will give an introduction on the structure and formula of carbohydrates. So in the other videos, we will be doing in details about the classification and also the structure of carbohydrates. Okay, now before we start, what are carbohydrates? We know that carbohydrates, they are one of the most important biomolecules where we obtain energy. So biomolecules are nothing but they are numerous substances that are produced by cells and also by living organisms. And these biomolecules, they have wide range of sizes and structures, and also they perform a vast array of functions. Okay, so the four major types of biomolecules, we know that they are carbohydrates, lipids, then we have proteins and nucleic acids, that is DNA and RNA. So these are the four major types of biomolecules. So in this series of videos, we are going to concentrate on carbohydrates. Now, what are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates, they are a large group of organic compounds occurring in foods, as I had already mentioned, in foods and in living tissues, including sugars, starch, and cellulose. And also these carbohydrates, they can be broken down to release energy in the body. Okay, so this term carbohydrate, it is used to designate a large class of compounds that are polyhydroxy aldehydes or ketones, or substances that yield such compounds upon hydrolysis. When you hydrolysis these substances, they release carbohydrates. Okay, so they refer to those class of compounds that are polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones, and they are the most abundant organic molecules in nature. Okay, and they are also referred to as saccharides. Okay, so carbohydrates are also known as saccharides, right, meaning sugar. And these carbohydrates, they are hydrates of carbon, that is, they are composed of carbon and water, and usually have a composition of CH2ON. This can be any number. Okay, so you can see that these carbohydrates, they are hydrates of carbon, that is, they compose of carbon and H2O and water. And some of the most common carbohydrates that we came across in our daily lives are usually in the form of sugars. Okay, so here you can see some of the example of sugars, such as the glucose, sucrose, fructose, cellulose, maltose, and many other forms of sugars. They are nothing but they are carbohydrates. So coming to the structure, here the carbohydrate molecules, they usually consist of these three molecules, that is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, they usually consist of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And majority of carbohydrates, but not all, they have this empirical formula, that is CH2ON. Because you will see later on, I will show you there are some exceptions which do not follow this formula, okay, the general formula of carbohydrate. And these carbohydrates, they are organic compounds organized in the form of aldehydes or ketones with multiple hydroxyl groups coming off the carbon chain. Now, to understand this, you can see this one. Sorry. Yes, you can see, for example, this one. All right. You can see these compounds, they are organized in the form of aldehydes or ketones with these multiple hydroxyl groups. You can see multiple hydroxyl groups are present which are coming off the carbon chain. All right. And the building blocks of all carbohydrates are simple sugars. For example, the one I had shown in this figure, that is glucose or fructose, these are nothing but they are monosaccharides. They are simple sugars known as monosaccharides. So just remember, just like in the case of proteins, we have amino acids, they are the building blocks of proteins. So same thing for carbohydrates, these simple sugars, they are building blocks of all other carbohydrates. All right. So for example, here I'm showing you the example of glucose and fructose, which are simple sugars known as monosaccharides. Mono means single, means one. Okay, so they are simple sugars. And these monosaccharides, as I had mentioned earlier, that they can be polyhydroxyaldehyde or aldose or polyhydroxy. Poly means many. Hydroxy, you can see many hydroxyl group are present. So they can be polyhydroxyaldehyde containing an aldose sugar or polyhydroxy ketone containing, you can see a ketone group here in the case of fructose, whereas you can see here the presence of an aldehyde group in case of glucose. All right, so they can be polyhydroxyaldehyde or polyhydroxy ketone. And one more point here you have to remember, that the ratio of the hydrogen as well as the oxygen in the majority of carbohydrate will be 2:1. As in the case of water, we know that the formula of water is H2O. So in most of the carbohydrates, you will find that the ratio of hydrogen and oxygen is usually 2:1, as in the case of water. That is why if you take a look at the general formula of carbohydrate, you will see that it is here CXH2OY. Here X and Y, it can be any number, but the ratio, since the ratio of hydrogen and oxygen is 2:1 as in the case of water, so this is the general formula of carbohydrate. But there are some exceptions. Okay, for example, as in the case of acetic acid, we know that this is not a carbohydrate. But if you take a look at the ratio of these hydrogen and oxygen, this acetic acid, although it is not a carbohydrate, but it fit in this general formula of carbohydrate. Okay, you can see here C, there are 2 C, and H, there are 4 hydrogen and 2 oxygen. So if you write here in this formula, it will be C2, then H2O2. All right, because 2 into 2, then it will be 4 hydrogen and 2 oxygen. I hope you get it. Let me show you here. See, for example, this acetic acid, you can write in this formula as C2, then H2O2. All right, so you can see there are two carbon atom, 4 hydrogen atom, and 2 oxygen atom. So it fits in this general formula of carbohydrate. But we know that acetic acid, it is not a carbohydrate. And also the next example or exception here is formaldehyde. Now if you take a look at formaldehyde here also, you can see that you can write this formula of formaldehyde in this form. Alright, it will be C because only one carbon here, and then H2O. But again, formaldehyde is not a carbohydrate. But there are some carbohydrate molecules, they are carbohydrates, but they does not follow the general formula. You cannot write this formula of Ramnos in this form, in this general formula of carbohydrates. So this general formula does not fit for Ramnos, which is a carbohydrate. Let me show you again this one. So for Ramnos, you can see, you can write here C6. Then if I write here H2O, alright, 2 into 6, it will be 12, right? So 12 hydrogen, but then oxygen, it will be, here it will be 6, but here it is only 5 number of oxygen. So you can see that the formula of Ramnos, although it is not, although it is a carbohydrate, it does not follow the general formula of carbohydrate. So these are some exceptions, okay? But usually most of the carbohydrate molecules, they fit into this formula, okay, this general formula. And just remember that carbohydrate molecules, they can be structurally represented in either an open chain structure, that is a Fisher projection, or a Howard structure. Now let me show you this one. Here, this is the example of an open chain structure. Okay, you can see here in this figure that this open chain structure or the Fisher projection, it is the long straight chain form of carbohydrates. Okay, so these straight chain forms of sugars, they cyclize in solution to form ring structures. Okay, as you can see in this one. In solution, they usually form a ring structure containing an ether linkage. You can see this ether linkage. Okay, which that is when a oxygen atom is linked to an alkyl group. You can see here it is linked to this carbon atom, and here it is linked to this carbon atom. So this type of bond is known as an ether linkage. So usually in solutions, these straight chain of carbohydrates, they cyclize in solution to form ring structures. Now the carbohydrates can also be represented structurally in Howard projection. Okay, in Howard projection. So you can see this second figure here, or this one, it is the Howard projection of carbohydrate molecules, which represents the cyclic structures of monosaccharides, as in this case glucopyranose or the glucose molecule. This is the Howard projection of glucose molecule, but this is the straight chain or the Fisher projection. Alright, monosaccharides, as I had mentioned, that they contain either an aldehyde group. Okay, let me show you in this one. Yes, this is an aldehyde and a ketone group. So just remember always that monosaccharides, they contain either an aldehyde group or a ketone group and several OH groups. Okay, and the structure can be carbohydrates, they can be represented structurally in either an open chain structure, that is Fisher projection, or the cyclic form, that is the Howard projection. So when we will discuss in my other videos later on, I will be discuss on the classification, the different class, okay, the different class of carbohydrates such as monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides. When we will discuss on all those different class of carbohydrates, we will talk about this in detail, all right, the structure of all these monosaccharides, disaccharides, and oligosaccharides.